So what really happens in the end? It's one of those huge debated questions in Christianity. Today, we're jumping into a fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty controversial answer called Christian Universalism. We're also going to look at a powerful critique against it. So let's break it down, why this idea is so compelling, and why some argue it might be a dangerous delusion.
And this really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? This is the central question our source material asks. I mean, the stakes couldn't be higher. Is universalism the greatest, most wonderful news you could possibly imagine? Or, as the author we're looking at argues, is it a dangerous idea that completely misunderstands who God is and who we are?
So, here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to explore what makes universalism so attractive in the first place. Then, we'll dig into the main counter-arguments, looking at God's justice, our own free will, and a really critical shift in perspective called the Hebraic understanding. And finally, we'll come right back around to that big question: is it the best news ever, or a dangerous delusion?
Okay, let's start at the beginning. Why is this idea so powerful? Why does it resonate with so many people? Well, it all really kicks off with a problem. A deep, nagging tension that sits right at the heart of traditional theology. And universalism basically steps onto the scene and says, hey, I've got the solution. So what exactly is this core problem it's trying to fix?
This right here, this is the dilemma that gives universalism so much of its emotional weight. To a lot of people, the idea of infinite, eternal punishment for finite, temporary sins just feels disproportionate. It can make God seem more like a vengeful judge than a loving father. Universalism tries to smooth out that very tension. And this is its proposed solution. At its core, Christian universalism is the belief that, in the end, God's love just wins. For everybody, no exceptions. It's the idea that every single soul that has ever lived will eventually be reconciled with God. And you can see the appeal, right? It's a powerful and incredibly comforting thought. But, and this is a big but, the author of our source argues that it's also a deeply flawed one. So let's get into that. It's time to look at the first major counterargument. And this one zooms in on the very nature of God himself. The author's point is that universalism tends to create a false conflict between God's different qualities. So on one side, you have love and mercy, which universalists argue have to triumph over absolutely everything else. But on the other hand, you have justice, which the Bible describes as totally fundamental to God's character. And justice, by its very nature, demands that actions have consequences. So here's the crucial point from the author's perspective. These two things, love and justice, they're not fighting each other. The argument is that they exist in perfect, inseparable harmony. They're two sides of the same coin. You actually can't have one without the other.
Now, this slide gives us a really powerful analogy, one that I think we can all understand. The source makes the case that love without any boundaries or consequences isn't really love at all. It's actually a form of indifference. You know, a child who's never corrected or disciplined doesn't feel loved, they feel abandoned. And the author says, in the same way, a God without justice couldn't truly be a God of perfect love. And that idea of consequence, well, it leads us straight to the next major point. This one shifts the focus from God's nature to ours. It's all about our choice, our free will.
Right. The case here is that salvation isn't something God forces on us. It's not a command. Grace is a gift, an invitation to a relationship. And just like any real invitation, you have the option to accept it or to say no thanks. It requires a response from us, a conscious choice to turn back to God. To drive this point home, to show that people can and do reject God's offer, the author points to a really specific moment in history. And it all comes down to this one number, just 5%. So what's the story? Well, after the Babylonian exile, the Jewish people were given this amazing chance to return to their homeland. It was this incredible offer of divine restoration. But guess what? Only about 5% of them actually packed up and went back. The other 95% chose to stay where they were. The author uses this to argue that even a gracious divine invitation doesn't just automatically override human free will. And here's another really cool analogy. Imagine a king who wants to be loved for who he is, not just for his power and his wealth. So what does he do? He disguises himself to allow a real, genuine relationship to form. The author suggests God does something similar. He doesn't just overwhelm us with his glory, because that would kind of eliminate real choice, wouldn't it? A genuine relationship requires the freedom to say no. Okay, so this brings us to what the author claims is the real game changer in this whole debate: a Hebraic understanding. This is key.
The argument here is that most of us today read the Bible with a very modern, individualistic set of glasses on. We're always asking, will I be saved? But the ancient Hebraic mindset was much more corporate, more group-focused. The main question wasn't about the individual soul, but about the nation, the people as a whole. They were asking, will our people be restored? And that shift in perspective changes, well, pretty much everything.
So universalists will often point to verses just like this one to back up their view. And when a modern reader sees that word all, what do we automatically think? We think every single person, right? But the author's argument is that's not how an ancient, Hebraic-minded writer like the Apostle Paul would have used that word.
And here it is. This is the crucial insight. In that corporate way of thinking, the salvation of a part can represent the salvation of the whole. So when that 5% returned from Babylon, the nation of Israel as a whole was considered restored. So when Paul writes, all Israel will be saved, the argument is that he means the corporate entity of Israel will be saved and preserved through a faithful remnant, not that every single individual Jewish person throughout history will be saved. Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. It's time to circle back to our original question. Best news or delusion?
So let's just recap the case against universalism real quick. First, the author argues that God's justice and love are perfectly balanced. Second, that our free will to either accept or reject God is totally real and essential. Third, that those biblical phrases about all being saved need to be read through a corporate lens, not an individual one. And finally, that the whole idea of a final judgment just doesn't make any sense if everyone is automatically saved in the end anyway.
And so the author lands here. Universalism isn't the best news ever. It's a dangerous delusion. And why is it dangerous from this point of view? Because by guaranteeing salvation for everyone, no matter what, it basically strips our choices of their ultimate meaning. It removes the reality of eternal consequences and, in a way, makes our life's most important decision totally irrelevant.
And that leaves us right here with this final, really critical question to think about. You know, no matter where you personally land on this debate, the author's argument really forces us all to think about that profound connection between our freedom to choose, the real consequences of those choices, and what it truly means for a God to be both perfectly loving and perfectly just.